I'd like to welcome everyone to the Public Safety Veterans Subcommittee. We have a long agenda, so we'll try to make it short and sweet as possible. I just want to start off by thanking the firefighters this weekend that helped out a World War II veteran fix out his yard, and they pulled out about 4 bins of trash and tree stumps and all that. So just really want to thank those firefighters that helped out this weekend with that World War II veteran, Mr. Hernandez. So thank you all. With that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And is there any public comments or the approval of the September 9th minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Alrighty, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And do we have approval for the September 30th minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It passes also. We have call to the public at this time. And we have Kim Baker. Come on up. And if you'd like to come up to the microphone and just state your name
Yes.
and you have about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay,
Uh-huh.
great. I don't know if this is on or not, but I do actually have some documents for you guys, everyone. Okay, who do I give them to?
Thank you.
I'm here this morning. My name is Kim Baker, live in Avondale, Arizona, and I am very frustrated still. Briefly, and to the point, I condemn the reports that have been produced to me from the police department in nature and in substance. And I've written a response rebuttal to those that I feel need to be aware of this. In a response that I got in the mail yesterday, it acknowledges some behavior of a police officer, and it specifically talks to an encounter I had on December 18th in South Phoenix. That wasn't the only occasion I had with this officer, and this is going to be my argument. On the 25th of 2012, January, this same officer is in Tempe, Baseline and Priest. The sin of omission is equally as great as the sin of commission. The chief and others acknowledged the South Phoenix incident, but refused to acknowledge the Tempe incident with this same officer. I know he was out of his jurisdiction. They know he was out of his jurisdiction. And why people were giving me less measure than I deserve is beyond me. But it doesn't matter. I will continue to come and make my argument until someone do their due diligence. We know the truth here. They know the truth. I will not stop. I will not stop. Someone needs to take care of this and quit covering this up. If I, as a citizen, cannot live free, I live in Avondale now. I moved out of Phoenix because of the harassment. Why should I have to move? Why should anyone have to move? And then it gets covered up, and it's your district, Ms. Gallego. Step up to the plate. I believe we have fine officers here. I know a lot of them. I've worked with a lot of them. But to cover this up and keep me feeling like I got to live under the cloud of the lie, I won't do it. I don't have to, and neither should you. That's my response to the letter that I received in the mail. Probative value, there's a lot there. Thank you.
Right on time, too. Thank you so much, Mr. Baker. What we'll do is we'll pass on this information to our Assistant City Manager, and he'll take care of it. Thank you so much. Next is Diane Barker. Come on down.
Thank you, Councilman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Thelda Williams and Councilwoman Gallego. It's good to see you. I'm in District 7, and I'm here to support the Paint Phoenix Purple. Okay. I've been getting these bands and passing them out. I wear it with my buck breast cancer. this month. Why this is really important is I understand half of the calls into the police department, too, are domestic violence. And when I went to Superior Court in the law library, I gave this to the women, and I says, there really should be more education in early years, even elementary, on the art of arguing, because that is what happens so much, is that when people's opinion, whether it's in family or otherwise, isn't heard, then a person can resort to violence to be the powerful party. And it's ridiculous. We need to learn to articulate at an earlier age, and we need to learn to respond to our law enforcement in the rightful way, too, and they to treat. It's a two-way street in all of what I'm talking about. So it's education at an earlier age to keep the peace. I'm very much in support of that. If you have ideas like that, I'd be glad to take that. I'm at a point where I'm talking with some administration at Superior Court, and I'd like to see them put more of a people's court in to handle particularly misdemeanors, and they have it in family court, but they need it in civil too. People need to learn at an earlier age how to handle their minor legal affairs, and our law enforcement, our lawyers are in specialities, the greater ones, whether it's zoning or like this. So I'm in that movement, and I'm looking for a good year coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. And there's no more call to the public, so we'll continue with our agenda. We have items 4 through 11 are consent only. There's no presentations or plan, but however, if there's any questions from my colleagues.
No, I'd move approval. Second.
Alrighty, I have a motion to approve items 4 through 11. A second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Items passed. Now we're on item number 12, which is our body camera update. Our chief of police will be here to give us a report. Welcome, Chief.
Councilman, member of the subcommittee, thank you for letting us be here today. We're going to talk about body cameras. You just approved on the consent agenda a grant proposal for more body cameras. We started our program back in 2012. We currently have about 150 cameras out in the Maryville precinct, and we want to expand that program. And Assistant Chief Mike Kurtenbach is here to explain that. So without any further ado, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, just want to refresh everyone's memory on the Phoenix Police Department's commitment to body-worn camera technology over the last 4+ years, because the reality is that we've been at the forefront of deploying and evaluating this technology since April of 2011. In April of 2011, we conducted our first pilot program whereby we deployed 18 cameras, 9 in the Cactus Park precinct and 9 in the South Mountain precinct. Based upon information gleaned from that pilot, we partnered with Arizona State University to apply for, and we ultimately received $500,000 in funding under the Smart Policing Initiative. That was in late 2011. Working in partnership with ASU, we deployed a total of 56 cameras in the Maryville precinct. And the reason for that number, and I know that seems odd, is there were 56 first responder officers that were working in the 82 squad area. That was the deployment area. The 81 area had 56 first responders also. That was the control group. ASU conducted that study for a period of 15 months. The study concluded in July of 2014, and there were a number of notable items that came out of that study. First and foremost, there was a 22.5% reduction in citizen complaints among camera wearers. There was a 65% increase in the number of unfounded complaints among camera wearers. And when we talk about productivity as measured by arrests, there was a 43% increase among camera wearers. So based on that information and under Chief Yonner's leadership, we've expanded our body-worn camera program. So now we have 148 cameras that are deployed. Of those 148 cameras, 135 are being worn by first responder officers and sergeants in the Maryville precinct. An additional 6 cameras are being worn by the precinct's Uniform Drug Interdiction Squad. And then we now have 7 cameras that are worn by our Crisis Intervention Squad, that squad that is tasked with serving emergent mental health pickup orders. Now that squad has citywide responsibility, so that therefore increases the footprint of the overall program. As you just approved on the consent agenda, we applied for additional funding from the Department of Justice, furthering our partnership with Arizona State University to further evaluate the utility of body-worn cameras in law enforcement. Now, what's different about this new grant going forward is that the cameras will not just be assigned to the Maryville precinct. This study will use a random controlled trial whereby, among the 114 patrol squads that comprise our patrol division, you will have cameras assigned to each. Some cameras, because of the random control study, will have one camera, some could have multiple cameras, but what this does, it allows us to evaluate the technology from Ahwatukee to Levine to Black Mountain, all parts of the city. And again, the goal is to see if we can replicate or otherwise further evaluate the results that we're seeing in Maryville. And this is very important for law enforcement going forward. This particular grant should not be confused with other body-worn camera grants that were awarded to agencies across the country, because BJA only awarded 3 research grants for Phoenix, for Milwaukee, and Miami. So it's an honor for the Phoenix Police Department to receive this grant. So body-worn cameras, from our perspective, serve as but one example of our organizational commitment to transparency and accountability. It's something that, based upon this 2-year study, we look to gain further resources and information so we can enhance the program. That concludes my presentation.
I have a question. Do the officers actually support using the cameras?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, yes. In a nutshell, when cameras were new to law enforcement back in 11 and 12, we had a little bit of resistance from our officers, but right now the officers like them. And the reason they like them is because complaints go down. They're more confident in the arrests that they do make. Our arrests have gone up. Some of the research has shown that the officers are more comfortable. There's no more he said, she said, because it's all in video. At least the audio is all there and captured. So they do support them. We support them as a police department. We'd like to get more. The good part, and Mike kind of glossed over some of it, we're at the forefront of this because we're studying it. I mean, anybody can put body cameras on their officers and they don't really know what the results are. But we've studied it at the beginning, and now we're furthering that with ASU. So we're moving forward from a kind of a national model in Phoenix here as we move forward. We're very happy with it.
And Chief, the final question I have is, we've been talking about using tools for transparency. Do you think this will be one of those tools that we can use for transparency when it comes to cases with police officers and victims?
Absolutely. As Mike mentioned, I mean, the public trust is an issue with all law enforcement right now, and the cameras are a huge tool to enhance that public trust and that transparency, because what's on the video is on the video, and it's for everybody to see, and it's a public record. So we think it'll take us a long way in that regard as well.
Any other questions? Councilmember Williams?
When we had that forum last fall, I believe it was, at the high school, one of the challenges you were facing was the storage and how you were going to maintain the records. And have you solved that problem? If so, how?
That's still a challenge for us. We have not solved it. Storage and privacy issues were the 2 things that came out of that Cortez High School thing. We're still working on those. And I'm going to have Mike explain, because in the grant, we pull all our stakeholders together and we move forward with that. So, Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Williams, that continues to be a big issue locally and nationally. So with our initial pilot and up to the 148 cameras we have deployed right now, we have elected to locally host or locally store all of our data. As we start to scale up, doing that becomes inherently problematic. So what you're seeing is one of 3 options: either to continue to locally host and invest in local infrastructure, which can be very costly, to go to a true cloud-based storage solution, or a hybrid, where you locally host the video for a period of 7 to 10 days, and then you push all the video to the cloud. That way you don't have to invest so much in the infrastructure. So you have the hard costs of the camera, you have the storage costs. What oftentimes gets overlooked are the personnel costs, however, and the impact, not just to the police department in managing all of the data, but to our city prosecutor and our county prosecutor as well. From the city prosecutor's standpoint, there is a lot of video evidence that is generated by our officers, and that's a good thing when we talk about transparency, when we talk about accountability, ensuring that we capture events as they occurred. But the management of all of that data is a challenge that, in this partnership with ASU and this further evaluation, we hope that we can provide some best practices, not only for Phoenix, but for the 18,000 law enforcement agencies that exist in the United States and abroad.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Gag.
Could you speak to the benefits to prosecutors about prosecuting cases when cameras are involved?
There was one specific focus area in terms of criminality on the initial study, and that was domestic violence. And what the study showed was that there was a 30% increase in the number of defendants that either pled guilty or a 37% increase in cases that were found guilty at trial when there was body-worn camera evidence that was available. So the focus was one particular crime type and one investigation. What the new study will do is see if that can be replicated across other crime types as well. So that's a good thing. As Chief Yonner alluded to, it eliminates the he said, she said, because the technology is very clear. And if the video isn't perfect, because it's just a tool and it's not oftentimes perfect, there's accompanying audio as well. So you can hear commands, you can hear spontaneous utterances or other statements that are made. But there's a challenge for the prosecutor's office to collate all of that information to ensure that it's available in case notes so that the prosecutors are prepared for trial. And not to be dismissive, it's a little bit easier at the county attorney level because they tend to have months and months to prepare for cases going forward, whereas the dockets that our city prosecutors face can be quite heavy and there's very little turnaround time. So there's value, the data shows that there's value, but we just need to work with our prosecutors and our other stakeholders to ensure that we aren't unduly burdening those that are impacted by the deployment of the technology.
Wonderful. It's very timely that we're having this conversation in October, since you spoke about domestic violence outcomes, and Ms. Barker opened our meeting with a reminder that we are really making that a priority throughout the year, but particular focus in October. So we've done a lot to raise awareness, and now we need even more tools, of which this can be one, for better outcomes with the justice system. So good scheduling from our chairman on that particular issue. Thank you.
It's a team effort.
And we have been a leader in early deployment, but I would love to see us be more of a leader in how many cameras we deploy. And so certainly committed to doing my part to get the resources to deploy it, since it's not free. Councilwoman Pastor and I were able to meet with the Department of Justice this year as we were applying for the grant. And I hope that was at least a little bit helpful, but we will continue to look for more resources because it seems like it has been a successful tool for both officers and the community, and when we have those, we need to continue to invest in them. Councilwoman Williams spoke about the data and collection of evidence. Is there any advantages to synergies if we use the same tools to store the data from the cameras that we used for electronic control devices, having more data in the same place?
So, Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Gallego, that's one of the things that we as a group will be looking at. Again, as I talked about the different storage opportunities that exist out there, locally hosted, hybrid, cloud-based, there are many vendors that exist. So what this grant calls for is the issuance of another request for proposal because technology has changed over the last several years. We're not suggesting that we're not happy with our current vendor, but at the time we issued this RFP well over 3 years ago to date, there have been significant changes, not just with the cameras themselves, but with how we store the data, how we manage the data, how we ensure that all of the data, for example, that is tied to a criminal prosecution is made available for the prosecution and for the defense, because we want to preserve everybody's due process rights. So the first step in this new grant is to assemble a committee, much like we did the first time, to reconvene and look at processes. Look at processes to ensure that whatever vendor we go with, whatever storage solution and data management plan we go with, it makes sense. It's the most efficient and it's the most effective. So again, Councilwoman, that's all part of this process. And something that I didn't touch upon earlier was the number of cameras. Right now, as I mentioned, we have 148 cameras that are deployed. We're looking to double the number of cameras that we have out there, so we'll be upwards of 300 cameras that we'll have within the patrol division as part of this effort.
Any other questions? We have a card from the public. Mrs. Woods, if you come on up. If you can state your name and then we'll start
Okay.
the clock. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Joanne Scott Woods. I've spoken at the last 3 formal meetings of the mayor and city council regarding the killings by our police of our citizens, and our police departments ranking among the top 10 largest city in the nation, the highest per capita, according to Better Government Association. This is a crisis, and to say I am deeply concerned about the continuation of murders for which there is no justice found is an understatement. I demand that our city puts the emergency funds in place to implement body cams citywide. I want that demand up for discussion on the next agenda. We have a crisis that cannot be ignored, and body cams are an important first step. Remain Brisbane might have survived his encounter with Officer Ryan. The autopsy showed there were no signs of a struggle that Mark Ryan described, and Ryan's first shot, approximately 4 feet away, which occurred as he laid on the apartment floor in a compliant position face down with his arms extended upward, severed his spine, paralyzing him, and the second was to the side of his back, damaging major organs, causing him to bleed out, completely contradicting Ryan's account and the media's report that simply said Ryan struggled with him, felt a pill bottle, which he thought was a gun, and shot him in the torso. Let's take steps now towards accountability to prevent the death of another Remain Brisbane. Don't wait for a further study to be completed. It should be both a police and a community demand immediately. Protect everyone's rights now and document all police encounters with citizens with body-worn cameras.
Thank you, Mrs. Woods. And I just want to thank the chief and also our assistant chief for all the community outreach that you had from the Cortez High School community meeting town hall that we had, and just the continuous outreach that you have in our community. So thank you all. And with that, that was information only. We have an update on our restructuring of our precincts. And I guess you're still here, Chief, right?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, while Assistant Chief Mark Lee is making his way here, Harry supervises our patrol division, and he's with Karen Contact today, who supervises our crime analysis unit. Harry's got a very busy job. He's got all our precincts. He's got 7 precinct commanders as well as the duty commanders. Almost half of our police department reports to him. So he's very busy. He does a good job, and he's going to talk about our redistricting update. We reorganized back in October of 2014. I want to talk about where we're at today. So with that, Harry.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. We're going to talk about, let me first get this to work, about redistricting. First, going to go over a little bit of the background of why we did the redistricting. Back in August of 2010, we had expanded from 6 precincts to 8 precincts. Our manpower at that time was significantly different than it is right now. When we did that, we increased our number of beats and squads. So we went up to 132 squads in the city, or 132 beats in the city. Then we went and entered a period of a hiring freeze where we did not hire police officers for several years. And in order to address that situation and our upcoming attrition due to retirements, drops, and always the unexpected number of people that leave the police department, we decided at that time to reconfigure and go down to a 7-precinct configuration. In order to do that, we would increase the size of our squads and also increase the geographic areas of those squads so that we would have larger squad sizes, more people on a street. When we look at our attrition, at the bottom of the slide, it says in 2015 we had 50 known to drop, 50 people that were in drop that we knew that were going to leave. We actually plan on another 30 to 40 that leave on top of that, usually for just unexpected reasons. Just to give you an example of what we've done so far, in 2014 we're expecting 28 people to leave. We had an additional 94 leave on top of that. That's 3 times the number that we normally expect to lose. So when we talk about trying to plan for the future and make sure we have an acceptable number of people on the street, we have to plan for those people that leave in the future. And so drop is just one of the things we look at. The unexpected unexpected people leaving drop early, people leaving for other jobs, people leaving because they're hurt or injured. It's a significant challenge to do that and also have the acceptable number of people on the street to answer calls. So the benefits of redrawing the boundaries. One of the things that our chief at that time, Garcia, desired was to make sure our boundaries were in line with natural boundaries. For instance, we had some precincts that crossed over freeways. you had a precinct that had a squad area that was on the east side of I-17 and then on the west side of I-17. So during rush hour traffic, there were significant challenges getting back and forth. You had squad areas that covered north and south side of the mountain. Again, significant challenges to cover those areas in an acceptable amount of time in order to deliver police service. The other thing we wanted to do was eliminate the half precinct model. Black Mountain and Maryville precincts were reconfigured into full precincts with 3 squad areas, and also along with that came a commander, also came an additional net squad, additional CAOs, so that they were a full precinct with the full manpower that the other 6 precincts had. Okay, our squad sizes. I know we've had a lot of talk about our squad sizes and talk about what our squad sizes are going to be, and I'll be honest with you, we originally talked about our squad sizes being somewhere around 9 after a reboundary, but because we've lost more people than even we expected, we did not reach that mark. I will tell you what it would have been if we'd have done nothing. If we'd have done nothing and kept our current 8 precinct configuration, our squad size would be about 6.5 people per squad. And that's if every person on the roster is working that day, 6.5 people per squad. Because of the reorganization, we were able to hit about 7.5 people per squad. And again, that's if every person that is assigned to the squad shows up to work, and that is not the case. At any given day, we probably have 15 to 20 people that are out because of injury, because of they're sick. We still allow people to take time off and vacation. So our average squad size of everybody's here today is 7.5 people. Without the redraw, it would have been 6.5. That changed. So we'll talk about our precinct boundaries current and prior to redistricting. If you look at the slide, what this basically is addressing, it's just addressing the percentage of the population that each precinct is going to have before and after redistricting. It shows the Black Mountain precinct. Make sure I have the right slide. Black Mountain precinct had 15.7%, South Mountain precinct had 15.3%, Australia Mountain has 20.4%. So it shows where we're at now after redistricting, how much of the population is contained within each precinct, if that makes sense. The slide on the right, or the right portion of the slide, shows what it was prior to redistricting. So for instance, Black Mountain precinct had 14% of the city. It now has 15.7% of the population of the city. It went down in square mileage from 182 to 169. So if you want to take a look at what it looks like now as compared to what it looked like before, the other thing that's important to remember is that when we distributed our workload and our officers to the precinct, we actually distributed them based on workload, as opposed to try and make everybody equal. We drew it along geographic boundaries, tried to make lines that made sense, and then we gave them the number of people we thought were necessary to cover that area, if that makes sense, as opposed to trying to give everyone the same number of people and then trying to draw the boundaries around that. Much more difficult to do. I'm going to talk about calls real quick, priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3 calls, and then we're going to talk about response times. Just a quick definition of priority 1 calls. Priority 1 calls are those calls that are crimes in progress, and there's a list of what those are: burglaries, armed robberies, an officer that needs assistance, sexual assault, homicide. Those are priority 1 calls. Priority 2 calls are those calls that are urgent in nature, where there's a potential for violence and they need a timely response. And then priority 3 calls is our lowest priority call. Those are generally our report calls, non-exigent circumstances, where you need a police officer, you just don't need one right now. And now we're going to talk about really quick about our citywide response times. Well, not real quick, we're going to talk about dispatch calls and then citywide response times. If you look at the chart, it tells the number of dispatch calls for service. It's pretty much remained relatively constant. It is going up slightly, but relatively constant from 2011. The number of calls that we go to every year has pretty much stayed the same. Priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 pretty much stayed the same. And we're going to talk about response times because this is the part I'm sure that interests you. And this is where it's going to be really important to understand some very important facts. We reorganized October 14th or October 20th, 2014 was our reorganization. If you look at our response times, for priority ones, last year, they were 5 minutes and 48 seconds. This year, they went up to 6 minutes and 8 seconds. So we had an increase in priority one response times to 39 seconds citywide. We had an increase of, since 2011. We've had an increase of priority two response times of 2 minutes and 35 seconds since 2011, and we've had an increase of priority three response times of 10 minutes and 36 seconds. So our response times have gone up. I don't think they've gone up significantly since 2011, but the important thing to remember is we have 328 less first responders since then. 328 is significant, and that's call answering officers, 328 less since 2011. And if you look at that and you look at the increase in calls for service, or the slight increase in calls for service, but you look at I think it's a moderate increase in response time. I think that's an incredible job that patrol officers have done to be down 328 and then have that little of an increase in response times. But we're going to look at specifically before redistricting and after redistricting. Our priority one calls, our response time have gone up a total of 23 seconds since before and after reboundary. Our priority two have gone up a total of 45 seconds, and our priority three have gone up a total of 58 seconds. And that is with a decrease of 132 people in patrol. That's 132 first responding call answering patrol officers with a moderate increase, with a slight increase in calls for service. So,
Councilmember Williams.
yes.
I know you're saying that the difference in officers, but during that time, you also changed the boundaries, right?
Correct.
Which should have helped, if I am understanding you right. So how does that quite factor in? Because
So this is citywide response time. So this is if there were no boundaries, this is just what our average response time is for the entire city.
right.
We had an increase of 23 seconds. And what we've done is pretty much, I feel we've held steady, although we've had a 23%, for instance, a 23-second increase in priority one calls. We lost 132 people. So
I'm not saying you're not doing well. I'm just saying that when you previously mentioned changing the boundaries, it sounded like then they should have been able to respond quicker had you had the same number of people, because they didn't have to go across the freeways or around the mountains or whatever. So that, I take it, has had an impact also on this time.
yeah, I think it would be even worse if we had not have done that. And I understand the question you're asking me now,
Okay.
so I apologize. Yes, Councilman Williams, I think it would have been even worse if we had not have done that. If you can consider having a larger geographic area to cross boundaries with only 6.5 people per squad, we'd be far higher than 23-second increase for priority one.
That's
and
what I thought.
45
That's
for
what I
priority
wanted
two.
you to
So
say.
I apologize, I misunderstood you. So, yes, so we're talking about a significant manpower decrease and what I feel are minimal increases in response times, although I will tell you, if you're the person that's calling for a priority one response, any time to respond is too long, but we have to be realistic in our response times. This chart basically shows the percentage of our calls for service and our percentage of first responders. So if you look at, for instance, Black Mountain Precinct 200, the gray column shows the percentage of calls that precinct goes on, and then the blue shows the percentage of officers. So, and believe me, just the number of calls you go to is only one factor of 7 that we consider in how to deploy our manpower. But this just gives you a skeleton look at, for instance, Maryville, higher number of officers than the percentage of dispatch calls. 500, lower number of officers than percentage of dispatch calls, if that makes sense. But to try to tell you, we're fairly close across the board as to where our manpower should be for each one of those precincts. 400 you might look at and consider it to be perfect because they're almost percentage of dispatch calls and percentage of officers is almost identical. But so we're close in the disposition, in the dispersal of our officers amongst our precincts. And the last slide is our hiring plan. We are hiring now. That's good news. This has a chart of the number of people that we'll hire and what months we'll hire them. I think it's important to realize that not everybody that we hire will be successful. It takes a significant number of people to get just one successful recruit. And the other thing that's important to note is that for our hiring, we hire them today. They're going to go through an academy that is almost 20 weeks long. They're going to get out of that academy and go through about a 14-week training program. They're going to complete that and go through a year of probation. So before they're an actual call-taking, solo, competent police officer, it's going to be about 18 months from the time that they're hired to the time that they're ready to be to significantly contribute to a patrol squad. About 12 months from the time that they start the academy, but really about 18 months from the time that they're hired. So when we look at their hiring numbers, you got about 18 months on of that, and that tells you when those people will be of value to us as solo qualified police officers. And then you throw in the number of people we're going to lose over the next 4 to 5 years. So we are hiring, that's the good news, and we hope to balance the books, if you will, and put larger patrol squads out there so that we can go back to our 8 precinct configuration in the future.
Councilmember Gallegos?
When we saw a presentation on this plan, which did not go to council for approval, Councilman Nowakowski and I expressed significant concern about the Estrella Maryville precinct.
Sure.
Could we go back to slide 11? You either skipped it or went too quickly for me to notice. So in some of the precincts that I represent, like Central City, people are very happy. But we talked at the time about significant concerns with combining these 2 precincts. We just received a report on officer-involved shootings. What precinct was number 1?
I don't have the report in front of me, so I don't know. I take it you're...
Maryville.
Maryville, okay.
And then number 2 tied, one of them was Estrella Mountain. So we combined them. We saw in the report significant information about how much time the command staff has to spend when there's an incident of this nature. Very intensive. We put them together. We also talked about the huge geography and the high need. We expressed concerns about particularly the people in the southern portion of that precinct and their service, and some of the stories we've heard are disappointing, and then we see these numbers. Priority 1 calls within 1 second of worst in every other area. 57 minutes, almost double on priority 3 calls, other areas of the city. I feel that the residents of Estrella and Maryville, Estrella Mountain and Maryville deserve the same service quality as the rest of the city. So I feel that this precinct boundary is a mistake for this portion of the city.
Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Gallego, it's unfortunate you think that. You may be right. We didn't have a lot of options. We haven't hired in 7 years. We had some challenges. We felt at the time that it was under our best interest to combine those precincts based on the geographic size, based on the workload, and based on the 7 factors, which include violent crime, calls for service arrests, and everything that we deploy our manpower on. We wanted to be consistent as a city, and we wanted to put our officers in the areas that they could have the most impact on crime. So we didn't have a lot of choices. We went with this choice. We're in that choice now. Will we reevaluate it? Yes, we will. This is all based on, redeployment was based on manpower. It was based on lack of manpower. We currently are spending, and you have a presentation on overtime coming up, on overtime we were spending in patrol. We're at 2,694 police officers right now. Chief Markley explained some of the reductions as first responders. That all contributes to your thought process as this being a mistake. If we had more police officers, our response times would go down. If we had more police officers, we could split those precincts. If we had more police officers, we could make Central City Precinct a full precinct with 3 squad areas and 3 net teams. You know, net teams are huge for our neighborhoods. And quite frankly, in Estrella, they're spread relatively thin. There's a lot of activity out there. We're spread thin citywide. So I don't have a real good answer to your question or to your response or to your statement, other than we can reevaluate it in the future. We fully support or appreciate your support in hiring. It's been 6 years since we've been hiring. We're looking for candidates for here to come out from our community to serve in the Phoenix Police Department. So hopefully through our hiring efforts, and we don't lose unexpectedly more police officers, we can reevaluate and go back to the 6 or 8 precinct model. We'd love to do that.
And Councilman Gallegos, and Mr. Chairman, I will tell you that, you know, reorganization and redrawing of the boundaries, that's nothing that we wanted to do. That's something that we had to do. And just to give you a quick snapshot, in 2009, we had 1,342 first responders. That was just before we went up to our large 8-precinct configuration. We had 1,342. We have 859 now. That's 483 people less. It was irresponsible for us to do nothing. We had to do something. And if you look at, we'll take Maryville, Australia for that matter, one of the big things within that area is the Levine community. That Levine community had to go either to South Phoenix or it had to go to Maryville. It had to go to one of those 2 precincts. So if we looked at the geographic area, the calls, the police facilities we had within there, we thought it was the most responsible thing to combine Maryville and Australia. Not an easy decision. Some decisions we had to make. This decision we made, and we have to live with that. And we're hoping that when our staffing gets to be an acceptable level, we can split those back to full precincts. But to do it now is irresponsible because we don't have the staffing to do it. So, we look at the city as a whole, and I understand because I go to those community meetings. I meet the people in person. I understand the frustration. But this is a tremendous challenge for us to safely police this city. And I will tell you, for the men and women that drive in that police car every day, that go to those police calls, for the challenges that they've had, have done a tremendous job. In Maryville, Australia, in Black Mountain, and all the precincts across the city.
I guess I feel we are challenging the officers in one precinct more than the others. And we say we want consistency across the city, but I don't see how saying one area should have close to double the response time on priority 3 is spreading that evenly across the city. So I guess, explain to me why we can't make some modifications. Why does it have to be the whole city at once? Why can't we say, in this one area, there was some unintended consequences, let's make some changes in the area where we're seeing and hearing from officers in public community meetings
And I will
about
tell
their
you,
challenges.
and Councilwoman Gallegos, we will make changes in manpower because we're now hiring. So in the past, when times were good and we were hiring people on a very regular basis, we did what we called manpower reallocation. We had recruits that were coming out of the academy 25 and 30 at a time, and we decided where they would go, what precinct, based on our formula. Now that when we didn't hire for 7 years, we couldn't do that. All we could do is shift our existing manpower. Now that we're hiring again and we're having about 25 people a month come out of the academy, that gives us the ability to put those people where we need them. And if we need them in Maryville, Australia, that's where they'll go. If we need them in Black Mountain, that's where they'll go. So that's our opportunity. Even though we're still losing people, we're gaining some folks in patrol, although it's small numbers because we're still losing. It gives us the ability to put them where we need them.
Councilmember Williams.
Speaking of hiring, is a typical class 25?
Classes are larger than that, but the Phoenix portion of it is usually 25 recruits that we're putting in each class, but a class is probably going to run around 50 people.
Okay, but I'm just talking Phoenix.
Yes, Phoenix, 50,
Okay.
or 25 people. sorry.
Okay, and I have heard that the amount of people actually making it all the way through is much less than that. Is that true?
I'll answer that question. Yes, we lose people. We lose about 17%. I was just looking at some numbers the other day on the number of hires that actually graduate from the academy. We lose about 1 in 5. It's almost 20%.
Almost 20%?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess although you have this allocated by month, if you're not hitting that number of people making it through in that month, then do you add to the next month so that
Yes.
you, okay.
We do. So
I-
if academy class starts today and we lose 5 as they go to graduate, or we lose 5 in the first week, we have an academy class that starts a month from now. Those 5 positions are then put in that academy class.
You add it, so
we
you
roll-
have 30. You
yes,
keep it
we
rolling
keep
so
it
you
rolling
have more
forward.
people.
Yes.
Okay. And how is
That's
the
our goal. That's working pretty good so far, but we're just beginning this. You look at your chart that's in front of you, it goes for months and months.
Oh, I know,
So
we're only like in the third month. of
Right,
it,
so
I
far
understand
we're
that.
doing pretty good, but that's going to be a challenge for us as we get a year into this thing, continuing the roll, depending on what those roll numbers are.
And how's the recruiting going so that you have the processed applicants to keep that roll going?
It's going okay. We did a test last month. We had 106 people that took the test. That's our lowest number so far. We're testing twice monthly. We do the written test, and we've talked about all the 8 steps in
Right.
order to be hired. We still have an adequate pool out there. We're filling, we're going to be fine through the end of this year, the beginning of next year. I think we get into April, May of next year, we're going to have some challenges. Mr. Mahoney and I are talking about how we're going to overcome some of those challenges, but our pool is dwindling quickly. The other agencies surrounding are really feeling the effects of Phoenix hiring as well.
I'm hearing
because-
complaints from them, yes.
because we all draw from the same pool. We've stayed focused on Phoenix. That's one thing that I've told our recruitment team. We want to stay focused on recruiting from our community. We're probably going to have to start moving outside and get more creative in our recruiting efforts. But that's yet to come, and we'll keep you informed as we move forward.
Okay, so if I remember this process from decades ago, you go through the initial process, you're accepted, and then you get a letter telling you which academy you're going to attend? Is that still the
pretty
process?
much. I mean, you first of all, you go through the written, you go through the background, you go through
Right.
the physical fitness, you go through its 8 steps, you go through the psychological test, you go through the drug screen. I'm missing a couple steps in there, but as you get all the way through, then you are accepted, and you get an academy date that you're going to the academy on such and such a date.
So you are now sending out letters for the academies that will go into winter?
I'll have to ask Mike Kurtenbach where we're actually at on that. Do you know that answer, Mike?
Every month, we're sending out new letters for the following month's academy class. So we're about 4 weeks ahead of time, 4 to 6 weeks, Councilwoman.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well, Chief, going back to Councilmember Gallego's question, do you see any restructuring of the precincts in the near future?
You know, Councilman, to be brutally honest, we can look at that, but we're just at the infant stages of hiring. You know the numbers. I'm not going to belabor them. We would like to do something in Maryvale, Estrella. You know, to make Maryvale a precinct of its own, you're talking a commander, you're talking 6 lieutenants, you're talking 18 sergeants just to start with. That doesn't include net teams, doesn't include a community programs person, an equipment coordinator, all those things that it takes to create a new precinct. That all comes from our first responder pool if we would choose to do that. I don't think we can do that right now. I think we have to get some hiring under our belt. I think, as Chief Markley mentioned, our FTO's first squad, Maryvale Estrella, is an FTO squad, the first one we ramped up. So as we get new officers coming in and trained, they'll stay in those precincts that we train them in. We might have to move some after they're off probation, but that's kind of our goal as we start hiring. That's one of the things that we're going to look at is expounding the manpower where we need it in the city, and it's obviously needed in that area. So the very near future, the end of this year, the beginning of next year, I honestly don't see it. As we get into the beginning of next fiscal year, I think we can reevaluate. I think we'll know more about where we're at on our hiring, and I think we'll know more about some of the crime issues. You know, one of the things that we all talk about is crime rate. And Phoenix Police Department and the city of Phoenix has been very fortunate. Last 5 years, we've reduced our manpower. We've reduced crime in the same 5 years. Right now, year to date, we're at about 0.5% down compared to last year. Our violent crime's up a little, our property crime's down a little. So we're still doing a very good job from a community safety perspective in spite of some of our challenges. Response times are going to be a challenge. The other last thing, if I can say too, that hasn't been taken into consideration in the last 5 years is growth. Growth is some of the areas on the outlying part of the city. We are 518 square mile city. We are 3 times as big as Pittsburgh and a lot of other places. How do you deploy and police in that model? It's difficult because I have to put some people up at Anthem. I have to put some people in that area, your area. I do. So
Not
the
really,
people
no.
that are, I talked to actually, funny story, I talked to Joe Klur the other day, and he is now writing a beat in our 21 area, which is up by there. He's bored. And he's saying because the calls for service aren't there, but they're always apt to happen. So we have to deploy manpower there so our response time, you don't respond from 19th and Bell Road to Anthem. It's not appropriate. So there's challenges with deployment. I think we're doing the best we can. Can we look at it and try to improve it? Absolutely. But I think the beginning of next fiscal year is going to be time to really look at this hard.
Chief, I was up at Pioneer Village last weekend, and there's some law enforcement up there that you could probably use, a couple sheriffs and deputies.
We use them all the time.
Chief, going back to looking at the data, I mean, it's concerning that you have double the call times. Is there a plan, or can we ask you to come up with a plan to really give some relief or some help for that Maryville, Estrella Mountain area. Looking at all the different precincts, Black Mountain is kind of lacking when you look at the other call times and stuff. But I think that Maryville and Estrella, we need to really think outside the box and come up with some type of a plan to give those officers out there some relief. I mean, we're out there at community meetings, your officers, the commanders out there, and they're doing a darn good job, and they're reaching out to the community, but it's just a big area, and there's some trouble spots in that precinct that they can use some extra help. So is there a way that you can go back and maybe come up with some type of a plan of relief while there's a need for it right now, and then maybe come back to us and let us know what you can do to help out or help relieve that Maryville and Estrella Mountain?
Certainly, we'll
area.
look at it.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Alrighty, next we have item number 14. All yours, Madam.
Good
Cindy.
morning. Good morning to members of the committee and the council. I have been asked to present to you today an overview of our Civil Service Board with an update on some data. You have received a council report, and the next 8 slides just basically is going to be an overview of our system and some of the current data from the years 2013, 14, and 15. I think, as everyone knows, the merit-based system is a charter system here in the city of Phoenix. It establishes a method of adjudication of disciplines for our employees through a civil service board. So basically, any disciplines that are issued that are considered formal, otherwise being a suspension, demotion, or dismissal, can be appealed to our civil service board. That board is created by charter, their authority is created by charter, and they then assign those administrative reviews to a contracted hearing officer. The role of the hearing officer is basically very similar to an administrative judge. The hearing officer convenes a hearing where all of the evidence regarding that particular employee discipline is heard. The city has a representative attorney. The employee often has either an advocate or an attorney present. And the role of the hearing officer is to produce a report that either sustains the discipline issued by the hiring authority, modifies the discipline issued by the hiring authority, or rejects it. And that hearing officer report is a public report, and that is submitted then to the Civil Service Board for review. The role of the Civil Service Board then is of the 5 appointed officials, the appointed board members by the mayor and council, to take the hearing officer's report and to listen to the hearing officer, and often they give time to both the advocate for the city and the advocate for the employee to answer any questions they may have from that report. And their role then is to either sustain, modify, or reject the recommendation of the hearing officer. The Civil Service Board then makes a motion, they make a decision, and their decision by charter is final and binding on the city. So here's what we
Let
look
me
like.
ask a question on
Absolutely,
that.
sir.
So final and binding, so is there a protest that they can go to or could they go to a Supreme Court, or
Yes.
is there another?
If an employee or the city determines that somehow the Civil Service Board acted outside of their authority by charter, they can take up an action in court.
Okay, thank you.
So this is what we look like. Over the last 3 years, all city has issued approximately 600 appealable disciplines, and this is out of a much larger population of disciplines that are not subject to appeal. So those would be demotions, dismissals, and suspensions. Citywide, 13% of those actually go to appeal. The vast majority of the appealable decisions are not appealed. And then I was asked to draw a subset of the police department. They are our largest department, held to the highest standards in the city. And of the 110 disciplines that were appealable in the police department, 31% were appealed. So again, the vast majority of those that are appealable are not appealed. When those are then taken to appeal in the police department, and I'll walk through this chart, I know it can get a little confusing. As I indicated before, there are 3 types of discipline that can be appealed: dismissals, demotions, and suspensions. And you can see that when the hearing officer has modified those recommendations, about 13 of those were modified from the hiring authority or the police chief's original discipline. When those recommendations then went to the Civil Service Board, a vast majority of the hearing officer's recommendations were upheld, but the board chose to modify some additional disciplines. And so if you look at the population of the 34 disciplines that went before the board in the last 3 years, the vast majority were modified in some format by either the hearing officer or the hearing officer and the Civil Service Board. This is just a bar chart representation that you have seen before of how we look in the city as far as appealed disciplines. You can see the trend is going down citywide, and you can see the trend citywide is that the majority of the hiring officers' disciplines are sustained by both the hearing officer and the Civil Service Board. It is a little different picture in the police department. We are seeing the same thing as total numbers are decreasing that go before the Civil Service Board, but the trend continues to see that there is more modified than is currently being sustained by the Civil Service Board. And so based on either the hearing officer's recommendation, what was heard in the hearing, the evidence that was presented, the board felt a responsibility to make that modification.
Cindy, are there guidelines or some type of boundaries that they have to consider when making any modifications? I mean, I read some of that list and I just gulped. I mean, I thought you reduced it and that was the problem. I mean, I find it unacceptable in some situations, but I don't know all the whole story.
Exactly. The hearing officer's reports are made public, so those are a public record. The Civil Service Board minutes are a public record. The boundaries are the boundaries as limited by the personnel rules that are by ordinance in this city. And so the personnel rules are what is going before the Civil Service Board and the hearing officer is this is the rule. And then really, to simplify it, the question is, does the penalty fit the behavior?
Right.
And so did the behavior occur? Did the behavior occur in the fashion that the hiring authority saw the behavior? And did then the penalty that the hiring authority assigned fit that particular behavior? And that's where I think that gray line is. I think we all have a personal belief of what certain behaviors are more aberrant than others. And when you get a panel of 5 people together hearing various types of evidence, they do work hard over these. I mean, I will not criticize the Civil Service Board. It is a very difficult seat to sit in, especially when you're looking at police disciplines, when you're looking at the extensive investigations that go on through the investigative bureaus, when you look at all the factors the chief has to consider, you look at the public factor. These are some of the most difficult cases, I think, that go before our Civil Service Board. And I think they do their best to be a representative, independent party.
When you say the ordinance, are they set by council, are they set by contract, and how often are they reviewed?
The personnel rules are set by ordinance in the city, and they get reviewed when a recommendation comes forth. I think the last review, and I may be wrong on this, I don't usually quote publicly, it's about 2008 for a modification of those personnel rules. All of then the administrative regulations and the general orders of the police department are fit somewhere under those rules. So there may be differing levels of, for example, the police department has a matrix that they have for certain disciplines and certain levels of disciplines. Those will each fit under a personnel rule, but the penalty will be part of that matrix, where in other parts of the city, we do it by comparison across the city. So there's a similar matrix or a similar process in the fire department as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Going back to the City of Phoenix's board, who's on that, or what's the makeup of that board?
That board is appointed by the mayor, and it is by charter. There can only be 2 representatives from the Democratic Party, 2 representatives from the Republican Party, and an independent. As those positions become vacant, the mayor appoints someone who is confirmed by the council. Right now, the Civil Service Board is fully seated. We have 5 members of that board, but we do have members serving out some terms that will end fairly soon.
Now, our City of Phoenix Employees Board, who, is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about the police?
It's all one board here.
It's all one board? It's the
Yes,
same
we do
board.
not have, like other jurisdictions, we
Right.
do not have a separate police fire board. We have one board for all of our employees. So it is the same 5 people who serve in all appeal cases.
They're volunteers, huh?
Yes, sir, they are, and they dedicate a great deal of time.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a couple of tidbits in closing. And in the report, we noted and gathered some information from the market on other merit boards and how their actions look. It's important to note that in Phoenix, our appeals may seem higher by comparison because we hear more types of appeals than they were heard. For example, one of the systems I'm most familiar with is Tucson. They will only hear suspensions that total 80 hours or more in a rolling year. So they will hear fewer appeals than our board will hear. It is important to note that we are working with our Civil Service Board to establish rules of procedure. Held some stakeholder meetings, making very good progress on that. They've operated under guidelines for a significant period of time, and now that we're fully seated, we think that having some good rules of order will improve our appeal hearing process and determination process. We are also expanding the number of hearing officers that we have. We've traditionally had 2 officers available. We'll be going to 4. Those contracts will be coming before you later on this month. And really looking at suggestions on how we can make this a better process. So, happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Can you speak to the training that hearing officers go through and then the training that Civil Service Board members go through?
Absolutely. Hearing officers are qualified by the nature of their expertise. And so the hearing officers that we contract with have been doing this for a significant amount of years, both public and private sector, largely attorneys who have practice in administrative law, in employment law, and they apply to a request for proposal and demonstrate their expertise in front of a selection committee as in any other request for proposal. Our Civil Service Board members basically are voting members of our community. When they are named to the council, they go through a training program with staff from the law department, the human resource department, the police department, because the rules are different. We'll meet with those and present to those so that they understand our personnel rules, our administrative regulations, our general orders, and how in general our process works.
And as part of any of the training for either of those groups, is there an opportunity for them to meet with impacted groups, so representatives of labor organizations and representatives of the community?
There has not been as yet, and one of the reasons with representatives of labor is they will be presenting for them and presenting to them. And so we try to keep it as cut and dry as we possibly can. These are the rules you're selected to administer.
And I have only heard requests from members of the community that they wanted to share their perspective, but it seemed to be comprehensive, had some value. But we did hear from members of the community that that some groups had perspectives that they wanted to make sure the Civil Service Board was aware and the hearing officers were aware of the perception in the community and some of the community's feedback on decisions. It seems that more dialogue is needed in this area, so the board is working on new rules of procedures, and this committee will have a chance to have public dialogue about them when they're done.
Under the charter, the Civil Service Board has the authority to establish their own rules. And so if you would like the opportunity to review those rules, I am more than happy to bring them before you and to make that request of our committee chair.
I think we would like to see that. No, I don't want to speak for the chairman. I, as an individual, would like to see that.
I can do that.
No, I just am agreeing with the councilwoman. I'd like to see them come back before us. Mr. Chair, I appreciate you putting this on because this has been a hot topic of conversation for several months around here based on some newspaper articles. The media has paid a lot of attention to this. As I also have questioned some of the decisions that I've heard or seen or read about. I am interested because I want to, I was here in 2008 and I didn't evidently know what we were voting on or what the ramifications of not paying closer attention or having a better explanation. I still have some concerns if there's other cities that could change the suspension to different hours of suspension. As this process goes along, I think maybe it's time to have a future review so that we fully understand what the regulations, the boundaries are now, and see if, since 2008, times have changed, the nation's changed. Maybe we need to look at some of this again. Thank you.
Could we go back to how much training hearing officers get?
Yes.
On particularly police-related and law enforcement? If
Their
they're
training is on the job, and what we have are hearing officers who serve for a significant time, either doing fact-finding, arbitrations, administrating hearings, other types of hearings in employment and law forums across the venue. The hearing officers are very expert at what they do, and they generally come from a law or legal background. Many of our Civil Service Board members also have a legal background.
It seems like there's been a lot of scholarship recently on police-community relations, and maybe we ought to make sure that they have the opportunity to see some of the things this committee does, including the President's Task Force and other.
Absolutely.
Best
We can
practices.
review that with our hearing officers.
And it looked like in looking in the cases, we primarily just have two who are doing a lot of the work in this area.
Yes, up until this current round of contracts that we're bringing before you, we've always held two hearing officers. The unions basically came to us and said, things are slowing down, we need more opportunity. Under the Police Officer Bill of Rights here in the state, they have a right to strike, so it was limiting how we could move the hearings through. So we went out, we're expanding that to 4 with your approval.
It definitely seemed that the hearing officer's recommendations are taken very seriously by the board. And
Absolutely. It is a very interesting discussion to sit in the room when the board is questioning the hearing officer.
So the only restrictions or the qualifications of this board is you can't have more than 2 individuals from the same party on the board?
That's
Is there
correct.
Any other, like a representation of women, representation of minorities, representation of that whole diversity aspect?
No, sir. They just have to be a member of our community, a resident.
And right now, what is the makeup of the board?
I happen to have that with me, sir. We have 2 Democrats. Actually, we have 3 Democrats and 1 Republican and 1 independent. Of this, we have 1 female, we have 4 males, and we have 1 diverse candidate.
Okay. I actually have 4 cards on this issue, if you don't mind listening to them. Will, if you come on down. You'll state your name and you have about 2 minutes.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. For the record, Will Gaona with the ACLU of Arizona. I'm going to be as brief as possible as I know there's a number of folks that are going to speak on this item as well. If you look at the chart labeled CSB 2013-15 Police Summary, it's on page 42 of your packet. You'll see that so far this year, 4 officers who have been dismissed for inappropriate use of force have appealed those decisions to the Civil Service Board. Of those 4, 3 have been reinstated by that board. And it's my understanding that after that happens, these officers come back and are once again patrolling our streets and interacting with the public. So Officer Kevin McGowan, for example, who was dismissed from the department after stomping on the back of a young man and breaking his teeth out of his mouth, is now on patrol in the Maryvale neighborhood. So these are officers who the department clearly feels are not fit to wear the uniform and have demonstrated that lack of fitness through their inappropriate use of force against civilians. And they're now back on the streets, once again empowered to use force against the public. The numbers in this packet show pretty clearly that this board treats police officers differently. And based on kind of the limited information given about similar boards that operate here in Arizona that's included in the packet, this problem is much worse in Phoenix than elsewhere. So I think it's kind of incumbent on you as board members to, as you said, continue to investigate this issue, continue to investigate why this board does treat police officers differently than other city employees, but also investigate some other options that may be available, such as, for example, a civilian review board that may be empowered to, investigate complaints, investigate use of force, and recommend discipline in these cases. There's over 125 of them that operate throughout the country right now, and I think it's time for Phoenix to be the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. What I was hearing about the board has been really hard to hear and disturbing, just because these are the type of things that continue to break down the trust within the community. Knowing that there are officers that can stomp on a kid's face, knock out their teeth. The victim was not part of the hearings, and the video was decided not to be watched of what was videotaped. And so that also questions what is, even if we have these body cameras, what would that do? I mean, this incident was videotaped and was decided not to view the video of that incident. And so that takes me to the continued stories and the trust and the lack of trust and the fear within the community, the lack of transparency in this process, the lack of procedures that have been existent, but also the victims' rights that are just continuously being overlooked. Further, for me, with the 5-year report that Councilwoman Gallego mentioned earlier, 53% of the people that were shot were Hispanic. That is an issue when we also see the response times that were shown earlier about how we that disparity. 53% of the people were shot were Hispanic in the Maryville Estrella precinct, right? And we're talking about equality within the precincts and the disbursements of police officers. Equality is an equity. And that's what we're seeing, that these reports are showing. Also with the report, and I wanted to mention that back up here, it is the first time in 6 years that we receive a report. It was a 5-year report that was promised a year ago. When are we going to have more reports about what is happening? When are we going to start questioning what is happening on a more constant basis? Similar with the CSB board. The CSB board in the ordinance and the charter requires the CSB to constantly report what is happening. I have not seen that either. And further, a lot of the stories that I originally wanted to talk about were the stories of the fear within the community, that this lack of transparency is causing further fear. People are not reporting crime. So earlier was mentioned we have reduced crime. Is it that we have reduced crime, or is it that we have increased fear? People do not want to call. Several different of community members within migrant, homeless, domestic violence are refusing to call to report crime. One of the biggest issues is the lack of an identification and the questioning that happens from officers that further criminalize people who are reporting crime, right? And so these are just some of the many things that are happening. Thank you for listening, and I hope and expect to hear more reports of what is happening within the department. Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to your question about the, this CSB report, is there a way to get a copy of that?
Well, and I also would be interested in the comment about required reports from the Civil Service Board. Are they required to do any kind of analysis and reporting, and has that happened?
All of the Civil Service Board reports are a public record, and they are on the website with the city clerk after each meeting. So all of the status regarding any actions they've taken are reported every single time that board meets. I issued the first comprehensive report of the Civil Service Board in January of 2014. And just reissued this report to you now. And so I think they have met their obligations to report. If you would like it in a different fashion, please let staff know. We would be more than happy, since the Human Resource Department provides staff to the Civil Service Board, to modify those types of reports for your benefit.
And the analysis in this packet was very helpful, so thank you for your
welcome.
work on that. Very instructive.
Is it Angelina Vera? Angela.
Gracias por invitarme. Aquí Norma me va a hacer el translator.
Yes, sorry, I'll be translating for her.
Mi nombre es Ángela Vera, yo vengo del Blood Wash, Save the Children. El motivo de estar aquí es porque yo trabajo con mi comunidad, estoy preocupada por los problemas que están pasando ahora. En mi situación yo fui víctima de robo.
Hi, my name is Angela Vera, and I am a captain of a Block Watch Save the Children. And the reason that I'm here today is because I come here to state the problems that are taking part in the community that I live in.
Desafortunadamente, cuando entraron a robar a mi casa, yo tuve que llamar a la policía y tardaron casi como 1 hora, si no es que más, para llegar.
And also, I just want to mention that I was a victim. They recently, last year, they came into my house, and there was a robbery in my house. It took I reported the crime, but it took about an hour for the police to come so I can submit my report.
Esa es una de las razones por las que la gente de mi comunidad, si es víctima de crimen, ellos no quieren llamar a la policía por la misma situación.
And that is one of the reasons why many people in their community don't want to call the police and report their crimes, because they take too long, and they're scared to report as well.
Otra de las situaciones es porque tienen miedo de reportar los crímenes porque necesitan un ID. Porque regularmente cuando tú haces un reporte necesitas identificarte.
The other reason why they're scared to call is because, they don't have a form of ID or a form of identification, so they don't take that initiative to make the calls.
Otra de las situaciones es por los abusos que se están cometiendo actualmente que algunos oficiales aprovechan su cargo para cometer abusos con las personas que ya son víctimas.
Another thing is that they don't call either because they're scared of the use of force that the police officers use.
Como en el caso del oficial que tuvo problemas con un muchacho y posteriormente no fue disciplinado, lo terminaron y por lo que sabemos ahora lo reinstalaron en Maryville.
Like the case that we recently heard from Will in regards to the teen that where his teeth were knocked out. So the police officer was reinstated.
¿Cómo saber o qué seguridad vamos a tener que esa persona no va a volver a cometer el mismo abuso de autoridad con los que son víctimas de crimen?
So, what are the next steps, or what are the responsibilities that these officers are going to take in order for these crimes or these type of things to not happen again? That's one of the fears that the community faces. How do we know for a fact that they're not going to commit these their use of force within the community?
Pues gracias por atender, ojalá y puedan apoyarnos con nuestras demandas. La gente de la comunidad tiene mucha inquietud, se siente insegura de alguna manera y también necesitamos pues más patrullaje en nuestra área porque pasan cosas y regularmente la gente ya no quiere reportar porque dice, no, pues la policía no hacen nada, no vienen, no tienen tiempo.
Just to summarize, you just said, thank you for listening and for taking this into consideration. But many of the times our community, really needs to be reassured that none of these things are going to be happening. And there needs to be more patrolling in the streets as there's a lot of crime going on in the Maryville area.
Gracias por escuchar nuestras demandas.
Thank you for hearing our demands.
Señora, te quiero dar las gracias porque creo que es tan importante que vengas y das esos testimonios. Esos testimonios nos ayudan a nosotros a escuchar qué está pasando en Maryville y otras partes de nuestra ciudad. I was just saying that it's so important to hear testimonies from individuals and thanking her for coming out here so that we know what's going on within not only the Maryville area, but also the city of Phoenix. But the other thing, too, is that I don't think anybody should be afraid to call the police. And if there is an incident like that, you should report it to either one of us or we'll make sure to get it to the right people. Nunca debes de tener miedo a llamar a los policías. si hay un caso como que pasó a usted o a otras personas, que nos dé una llamada a uno de nosotros aquí y nosotros tenemos ese dato para hacer algo con esos casos, ¿no?
Sí, la verdad yo a veces me frustro porque yo trabajo directo con la gente. La gente a mí me llama a mi teléfono, mira, tengo este problema. No sé si quieres traducir.
Yeah, she said that my frustration is that community members call me and they tell me their frustrations or they report to me.
¿Cómo puedes ayudarme? ¿A dónde puedo ir? ¿Con quién puedo confiar?
So who do I report to? Who can I trust? How can you help?
Y yo tengo que buscar la forma de poderlos ayudar y darles seguridad, porque ellos tienen miedo de reportar.
So as a Blockwatch leader, how do I have them have that trust and be able to report?
Supe del caso del policía de uno de los conocidos que entraron a robar a su negocio y él lo reportó. Y al final ya era víctima y todavía fue más víctima porque lo investigaron y al final ¿cómo se dice cuando lo?
The sound book?
Yeah.
Basically,
Yes.
it was an incident where somebody called the police that they got broken into, and then they ended up getting booked for not having some documentations and stuff.
Y fue víctima por
And she
segunda vez.
became a victim instead of us helping, he became the victim.
Nosotros
Gracias.
como Bloodwatch queremos trabajar con la policía, estamos para ayudarnos.
So us as a Blockwatch, we really want to work with the police department to help one another.
Thank you.
Gracias. No, thank you. We have Norma Jimenez.
That's me.
All right.
Hi, good morning, council members. I just want to continue to speak a little bit more on the trust aspect of the community, right? I work with many Blockwatch members in the Maryville area, and many of the times they voice that they are definitely, there's no trust between the police department and the community members. So, because of that, like recently where Angeles was speaking in regards to the incident of the business owner, who's a flower shop owner, right? And he reported the crime of his house being broken into, and so the police department or the police officer came and he took the report, but continued to further investigate him and ask him for an ID. So the member, the business owner, provided his passport, and so they continued to question him, and so he provided the policeman or the police officer asked the business owner if he had any type of like guns in his household, and the business owner said yes, so he gave him what he had, right? So it's little things like that where this business owner was then taken into custody, and but it's crazy because in the Constitution it just says that everybody is allowed to have some sort of like bear arms, right? And so for this person to be taken into police or into custody for him having some sort of arm or gun, how is it fair, or wherein that was his violation? And so and later we find out that he was actually patient hold and ICE hold. So then, that's his case. And just for not having an ID. So, if this happens to a business owner, then community members are, that impedes them as well to not be able to contact the police department and have that trust within them. So, we just strongly urge that there's some sort of procedures or something so that our community members can report and not be scared to report their crimes that are happening in their areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like someone to follow up with you on that situation? Yes. Could we?
Mr. Chapman.
Ken Chapman. I'm a resident of District 4. I want to go back to this topic of the CSB board. At first, I wasn't going to speak. I was disturbed by some of the reports I'd seen in the paper about the officers who were being reinstated after their own department said that they shouldn't be wearing the uniform. After hearing this report, I'm actually disgusted. The idea that our city is represented by 5 people who are not trained adequately, don't have the proper resources and guidance, who are able to create their own rules for what they will use to adjudicate a case. The idea that is majority women and almost a majority minority community is represented by 4 white guys. Fundamentally, it stands in opposition to everything that the city of Phoenix and that the police department and the community wants to have. We want to have a representative democracy. We want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. And to say that it's somehow acceptable, or that worse, this is the way it's always been, and therefore we can't be honest about what needs to change, is the part that disgusts me. We have to re-examine this from the ground up. It's no longer acceptable to be in a situation where our board review process is actually undermining the good work that is happening with the police department and the good work that's happening in the community. We have to fix this, and we have to fix it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the board members? I have a comment. I know that this is city charter, so there's not that much we can actually do when it comes to the board. But is there a way for us to actually go into more of a debt review of this board to see what we can actually do as council members?
The ordinances?
Pardon me?
The ordinances?
Yeah, the ordinances and maybe even the makeup of the board, the review board, that it will reflect the community that it represents. And also, is there, I mean, to have 5 individuals and to handle the whole city of Phoenix, the 6th largest city, I mean, that's a lot of responsibility for volunteers, and that's a lot of volunteer hours. Is there a way to create more than one? And could we actually create one for our employees versus public safety? Or I'm not sure, but if you come back and maybe give us a little bit more details what we can do without taking it to the voters to change a city charter. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman, we'll look at the issues that you've raised and see what options there might be, and we'll put that on a future agenda.
Anything else you think needs to be added to that, or?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much. And then we have item number 15.
Okay. Good morning, Jill Salaya with the Police Department. I'm going to give you a presentation on our budget for the first 2 months of the fiscal year. Our current budget is $566 million. Through the first 2 months of the fiscal year, we're pretty even from last fiscal year, even a little bit 1% under budget at $99 million. Our top 10 expenditures are salaries, pension, and group health insurance, and overtime. And then as you can read down, the lowest are your sworn retiree buyback, and then our jail services. And then our revenue collection, we have our court awards, our funds that we get from our SRO program and our special events, IGAs and task force, our false alarms, vehicle impound, grants, and pawn shop. And that's it. Any questions?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. First thing I'd like to do this morning is introduce a new face to you. I've brought with me today Ms. Patricia Lucero. Patricia is the administrator of the court's civil division, which is a significant portion of our operations. About a little over 80 members, staff members of the court report to her. And she has full operational control over many of our functions that bear directly on some of the things that we're going to be talking about here, specifically with our civil traffic division, traffic tickets, those sorts of things. And I have asked her to step in and help me out with this in the future, so I wanted to introduce her to you so that you would know the face. As we look at where the court stands out of this fiscal year with a full general fund budget of about $27.4 million through the end of August, we'd spent $4.5 million. It's about 16.5%, which is almost on the nose for what we would expect in the first 2 months of the year. Right even on budget, just a tiny hair under it. What's interesting as we go to the next page is that as we look to a year-over-year comparison, we're actually spending, at this point in the year, a little over 14% less than we did last year. When we go to the next page, not yet, sorry. Fast. He's too fast for me. We'll talk about how those are personnel costs, but in looking at those numbers, I had my staff double check. I wanted to make sure that's what it was and why it was that way. And the largest reason for that, I think, is the way in which we redeployed some of our resources at the end of last fiscal year. We actually drew down in size by the equivalent of a full criminal division and a full civil division, and better utilized some of that space. It's quite a number of staff members, and that's really showing up for us this year in terms of spending less money than we did last year. The court also continues to carry a significant number of vacancies. That's not because we're trying. In many instances, it's because the recruitment process takes a long time. And then I also like to think that we're pretty good at it, which means that once we get staff members in the door, we're also very good at promoting them from within, which just means we have to bring in more. So. On the next page, as you take a look at it, again, like police and like fire, almost overwhelmingly, our top 10 expenses continue to be personnel expenses. Well, that's by far the largest expense that we have. Last page. Thank you, Ken. Down to revenues. Not much of a change from last year, but precisely the trend that we have expected to see as we've gone through. Total of about 3% under for the year on what we had expected to come in terms of fines, fees, and revenues.
Any comments?
I have a question. On these charts, and it also applies to PD, we're doing a comparison to last year, correct?
Yes, we are.
Therefore, are we assuming that your budgets were exactly the same from year to year? I mean, how does this reflect to your current budget as well as a comparison to last year? You see what I'm saying? Like, I've got you totally confused. I've got you confused. I can tell.
No, I think I understand what you're saying. Each year, the budget changes based on, in our, like, for our salaries. That's gone down a lot because we've lost a lot of employees. So
I thought we put a lot more emphasis and have told you can hire and put more money into salaries.
we do have, the money is there in our total budget, but as far as expenditures right now, it takes a while, like in the previous presentation that Chief Markley was indicating, it takes 18 months. I mean, it takes a while to get people hired. On the civilian side, it's the same way. It could take 3 to 6 months to get a civilian in, just because of the whole hiring process and going through background and poly. So those are some of the type of things that, because most of our costs, like 92% of our costs for general fund is personnel cost. So when those costs go down, they take a look at our previous year budget, and then we try to plan for future years, and we will increase that because you were graciously awarded us the $2.2 million for the module training, so that has been included in our new budget now. But when Budget and Research does a 3+9 budget process, they take a look at what our current staffing levels are right now, and they try to project out. And we kind of, like I said, 92% of our budget is personnel, and that's kind of what that process is.
Yeah, I'm just curious, though, not only how you compare to last year, but how you're measuring within your allocated budget for this year.
Right now, last year, our general fund, we actually came $1.1 million under budget. This year, we're running a little high, about 1% over for the first 2 months. And a lot of that has to do with, we have a lot of one-time charges that hit at the beginning of the fiscal year, and that kind of skews the percentages of what we've spent.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Councilmember?
We've been talking about fines and payment plans, and when I joined the council, we would ask people how much you had in credit cards and ask people to max them out as they paid their fines. Have we made any changes in that area?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Williams, you definitely, and so let me put a little context to that. The current approach to the courts, to enforcement of the court's financial obligations that we've got going now, it's been in place for about 22 years. It was actually put in place by my predecessor's predecessor. And over those 22 years, it has served the court and the city very well in many regards. I think, as Councilwoman Williams said very eloquently a few minutes ago, the world has changed, particularly since 2008. And many of the things that we have had in place for a long time that have worked very well don't necessarily match up with the world that we currently operate in. That was one of those areas. So I don't want to say that we ever had a situation where we forced people to put the fines that they owed us as the court on their credit cards, but certainly it was an option, and I think at times in the past it was an option that could be pushed on people. One of the things that, and frankly that was not something that I ever found all that tasteful. One of the things that I can tell you today is that is absolutely not happening. When we sit down with people in the process of coming to a mutually agreeable payment plan, because let's face it, lots of people are in a situation where when they come in and there are mandatory minimum fines that are associated with it, are not in a position to pay all of that on that same day. I dare say many of us wouldn't be. And so we'll work with people, we'll set them up on payment plans, we'll come to a mutually agreeable amount of what they can afford to pay us over time. And as part of that process, making sure we have the information that we need in order to do it appropriately. We've looked at their financials, and so we pull credit, we look at what they actually have. And at times, if people do have open credit cards with amounts on it, we certainly offer them the option. And from time to time, people do want to get rid of it all today. But one of the things that I sat down with the court's controller several months ago and said was that we simply would not be in a position where we were perceived as telling people that they had to do that. We leave it completely up to them. So to the extent that there have been times in the past when people might have felt pressured to go ahead and pay off their court fine on the credit card today, that should not be happening anymore.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm a firm believer that when people are in an economically stable situation, that helps with public safety, and that we don't want to push people into sort of the brink of what they can financially take advantage of. We're having a great event with the Women's Commission where financial literacy is one of the things we're teaching. And in that situation, we tell people not to max out their credit cards. And so it's very good to have the courts as a partner in that, because we do want people to pay their debts, but we want to make sure that they can continue to afford other essentials as they go forward with that. So thank you for your leadership in that area. That I think actually may help us have a more financially successful court system as well if we work with people and understand their financial realities.
Councilwoman Williams, I agree with you 100%. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Gallego. I agree with you 100%.
We all love her more.
And I think that from all perspectives, if what we're doing in our approach to the financial obligations that people need to pay is making sure that we are doing everything we can to facilitate their compliance with it, we find better long-term compliance rates. If we on the front end are reasonable and manageable about what people can actually afford to pay us, My belief is that they will, and we will find over time that they can do that. And so, to the extent there is, people need to be held accountable for the actions that they commit, we do that, but we want to make sure that we're not doing anything extra that helps stand in the way of them being able to do that, because it is a win-win. If people can remain compliant and not have a host of the other consequences fall on them that happens if they can't make that payment.
Ready? Thank you.
Okay. Chairman Nowakowski and members of the committee, I'm here to present for the fire department our budget. And as you've heard from my colleagues, it's going to be much the same as theirs. Different numbers. Our overall budget for this year is $309 million. And year-to-date spent $48 million. That's 15.6%. But taking into account we're at 16% of the year in our reporting, we're just underspent, much the same as my two colleagues here. Monthly expenditures, as you see in the negative brackets for the percent of variance, it is underspent in comparison with last year. Some of these are one-time anomalies which have to do with annualized contracts that have not hit or been encumbered out of the budget, and a couple of those are around $1 million, which makes up most of the variance you see up there. As far as top 10 expenditures, very similar: salaries, pensions, health insurance, overtime. For constant staffing, this is an area in the fire department's budget that is continuing to be problematic, although very similar to last year, has a lot to do with the staffing that you've heard a lot about here, both in police and fire. As we move to a full staffing model, we expect to start whittling this number down and get it back within reason, or in a present time where it was manageable. Equipment management is how we take care of the trucks, and then some of the other things that go along with personnel expenditures. Part-time ambulances is how we staff our peak time demand ambulances that are out in the system. And then last is fire overtime. Revenues collected, if there was I guess a bright note to our budget, we are ahead of track. Our ambulance transport revenues are up and have been up last year. It has largely to do with the collection rates that we get from Access and from some of our other payer mixes. So we continue to trend upward there, so that's a good thing for us. Dispatch fees and dispatch maintenance are those fees that we assess the partners that are in the CAD consortium. And those are largely predictable based on the call volume that we're experiencing. And that's it.
Any questions, comments? I'd just like to thank you all for really being good stewards with our tax dollars, and as people can see, it's so important that we do a monthly overview of what we're doing and manage by results. And it looks like we're doing a great job. Police is down by 1% from last year. Fire is down by 4.5%, and the courts are doing a great job by almost 15% from last year. So of savings. So thank you so much for being good stewards and doing a great job. With that, the next thing on the agenda is future agenda items.
We have a list. Mr. Chair? Here's a copy.
Thank you.
I would like to have an update on the fire department. We've had PD in here several months in a row talking about hiring practices, personnel shortages, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to have something very similar for fire.
Police Chief Joe Yonner wants to give you a high five on that.
As is my tradition at every meeting, I always ask to get more information on our pilot project on sex offenders. I'm going to start celebrating anniversaries of that request.
The chief won't high five, but he'll take care of that. Right, Chief? All right.
Anything else? Well, I'd like to add one. One of the things that we heard over and over was just the building that confidence, especially within our Hispanic community. I'd like to look into this whole safety issue when it comes to the IDs And how do we create some type of a ID for the city of Phoenix that if individuals need to have an ID that they can feel comfortable saying that they are a resident, not an ID for a driver's license ID is something totally different. A resident of the United States is totally different. Just basically a Phoenix ID that when they're actually a crime or call police officers for that their house has been broken into or so, that they can feel comfortable enough to show them that they are the resident of that household or so. If we can look at if it would be, what's a creative way of doing that? And also if a police officer pulls someone over, they have no driver's license, no passport, no type of ID, how can we identify that individual? And also for individuals that are involved in maybe domestic violence and stuff, how do they have an ID if they've left all of their IDs at the victim's home where they were actually victims at? So if we can maybe look into that, that'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? All righty, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Did you have any?